Welcome. Today's podcast is with Adelia Sandoval. Adelia Sandoval is a spiritual leader, ceremonialist, songkeeper, and ordained minister born around 1953 and raised in Santa Ana, California. A lineal descendant of the Acjachemen, the Indigenous people of Orange County, she serves as the spiritual overseer and cultural director for the Juaneño Band of Mission Indians, or the Acjachemen Nation. She has been identified as the Cultural Committee Chair and directs the tribal women's singing group. Her path deepened in the early 1990s when a reburial ceremony for ancestral remains unearthed at Rancho Mission Viejo brought her under the mentorship of Kathy Lobo, who taught her the 4 clan dances and set her on the road to becoming a bear dancer, reburial site ceremonialist, and keeper of the traditional songs. She was a central ceremonial and public voice in the preservation and December 2021 dedication of the Putui Dem village, a cultural site honoring one of the first known Acjachemen settlements in San Juan Capistrano. Beyond her tribe, she founded the outdoor Native American healing ministry, Song of the Earth, was ordained a Catholic deacon in November 9, 2019, and serves at the St. Matthew Ecumenical Catholic Church in Orange County. She has served as a North American trustee on the Global Council of the United Religions Initiative and contributed to the anthologies Women's Spirituality and Transformative Leadership and Women of Spirit Share Rituals Divine. Her public work emphasizes living relationship with land and ancestors and a practice of compassion and forgiveness as the foundation of peace. Thank you so much for listening. I hope you enjoy.
Oh, yeah, hey, oh, yeah, ho. Oh, yeah, hey, oh, yeah, ho. Wea hey, wea hey, oh, wea ho. Ha, tu omna, o matwe, honoshi she'ila. Oh, we thank you for this beautiful day and for all that you have given us. Cham shum polov kala, oi chongai, cham hik shangai, chon hik shash o vivo. Our hearts are grateful for every breath, for we know that every breath is a gift from you. You are aware of this with such love. May we be aware of each other in the same loving way and know that we are all connected. Supulna cham milotibun. We acknowledge our connection to each other and also to our sacred grandmothers, the resilient and beautiful people that the Acjachemen people descend from, but also all of our grandmothers. We descend from these beautiful women in our past. We know their names and some we don't, but we know that we descend from them and we are thankful for our connection to them. We ask that this podcast go well and that people can learn from it. Ila, amen.
Thank you so much, Mother Adelia. It's wonderful to have you. I can't even begin to say how excited and how curious I am to ask you my questions. And I'm very grateful that you made the time to come. I'd just like to dive straight in. Who are the Acjachemen people?
The Acjachemen people are the indigenous descendants, the people who walk this land, which we know today as Orange County, California. So the Acjachemen people basically have descended from the people who lived in this area for thousands of years and are now living in the present. That's the briefest answer that I can give you. But there are also people who are known by many different names. I'll just give you a few. Ocean people, oak people, people of the acorn, star people, people of the wild sweet pea, which is what Acjachemen means. And also, there's our old name that we still use today called the Juaneño Band of Mission Indians, the builders of Mission San Juan Capistrano. But we are also the people of the West, where we have basically this very similar language. So, but Acjachemen itself means wild sweet pea. So we are the people of the wild sweet pea. I think the geography of the land has a lot to do with the people, given that they are ocean people. Our ancestors lived along the coast, beautiful Pacific Ocean. And also, some of them felt more comfortable living inland along the hills. We have the Santa Ana mountain range that we call today. There's the great mountain, the Acjachemen people call Calaupa. which we call Saddleback Mountain today. This area, all the way up to southern Long Beach or Long Beach area, all the way down to Oceanside, and of course, the islands along in the Pacific Ocean along our coast here. And so, it was a very beautiful area, which was paradise in many ways. And I think we can still, if we work really hard, we can still see that paradise among the buildings, among the freeways and all of that. But it was definitely paradise. The abundance along the coast here in California for all those 16,000 years or even more, I would say there was everything they needed to live here. Everything. I mean, there were probably some climate issues, several droughts over the centuries, I'm sure, occurred, but I think they lived in long enough through those times to be able to manage how to live in their daily lives, so to survive.
What kind of traditions exist, and what are the ceremonies that originate out of that experience of the land that you mentioned?
Well, if we want to talk about ceremonies, that is a very interesting subject, and it can be very hard to talk about. The people, they live their life through noticing, through observation, through paying attention. And so as time went on, they began to create these, what we call ceremonies, in order to keep balance around them and within them. Ceremony is always done for a result. I'm not sure what other tribes, how their ceremonies began in other peoples, but I do know that it all came out of one thing, and that is noticing and observing life around them. And as time went on, they began to realize that they have a relationship with all of that. And so how do they get in better relationship? So most of it began with observation. And so out of that observation came ceremony, which is kind of a beautiful way to say it, but I think it also is more started with story. A story in and of itself is noticing, paying attention, being aware, observing. And so what I really truly believe, and what I've also was taught, is that the ancestors just watched. Perhaps they just sat and watched, as way back when, and then they began to see, well, how do the plants behave? How do the rocks behave? How do the animals, those other beings that are along with us, how do they behave? And they just observed. They observed, what to eat by paying attention to the bears. They learned how to pay, what to, where the fish were and all of that. So as time went on, ceremonies, rituals, but also ways of life began to emerge. The other thing that they noticed is that life around them sang. Life around them was alive. And so therefore, in relationship to that, they created song. They began to hum. They began to chirp. They began to sing like the birds. They began to pay attention to how all the life around them began to relate to nature around them. So out of that came song. And I think song is probably the most important part of who we are as Acjachemen people. Began to relate to everything around them through the voice, through not my voice today, but through song itself. Song, so they began to sing. They sang to the sun. They sang to the moon. They sang to the plants around them. And so these songs emerged through human observation and paying attention, and then so what that song did, I think, was began to make them feel really good. So in a way, they found that singing was a way to relate to what was around them, but also for healing, for putting themselves in the presence of something, whether it be, the trees, or, in the presence of the sun as it was rising in the morning, the presence of the stars as they looked up in the heavens. So, and then out of song came ceremony. So then, what is natural? When you sing, you begin to dance. You hear others sing and you begin to dance. So then the dance came out of the song. And then the song and the dance working together, then it began. So it was almost like acting out what was going on around them. I just try to put myself in that place and just watch as our ancestors observed the ocean. For example, The ocean goes out and it comes in. It goes out and it comes in. And so what they did is they danced on the edge of the ocean, and they went out and they came back in, and they came. And so it was like this. And then that's when they began to see that there was such thing called reciprocity. They may not have used that word like we use it, but it was like what reciprocity is occurring. There's a give and there's a take. And they saw the immense power of life around them as well. So they learned how to adapt to that immense power. So the wind was also something very important to our ancestors. So they began to notice that if they talked to the wind, if they talked to the clouds, and if they talked to the sun and the moon, they do truly believe they had a relationship. And they actually, I would say, there was some of them who were very skilled at this, and they actually could make it rain. They could actually calm the wind. They could actually see how everything was in a dance with everything else. And I think that's so amazing, because today we don't think about those things. We just rush through our life. We got to get here, we got to get there, we jump in the car. There's no relationship at all, except what we got to get somewhere, we got to do something. So it was very different. There wasn't that the need to control their environment so much as the need to be in a relationship with the environment. So it's very different, very, very different. And so out of that came ceremony. They would see that there was something that was missing in their observation. Perhaps there wasn't a lot of rain happening at a certain period of time. So they created music, singing, so that somehow by the way they sang it together, it would start to rain. And we have so many history of and stories about that we know that it was actually occurred. So that's, what can we say about that? It happened. I think it's a very good practice, to be inspired by life, to be inspired by, you go on a hike and you see the path of the walking, but you see the grasses growing, you see the flowers blooming, especially now in the spring, and to allow yourself to feel that in such a way that you express it in a poetic kind of sound or song even. So I encourage the young ones to create songs and music, because I think it's a good way to learn how to make that relationship become even more real. We have many ceremonies, the Acjachemen ceremonies, both social. And when I say social, we have some ceremonies that we can invite others that are not Acjachemen to them. And I'll give you an example of it. It's called the planting stick ceremony. And I think, I can't remember the date, but it's next month. And it's just dancing around the grandmother oak here in San Juan Capistrano. And it's a beautiful ceremony, and it's a way to relate to nature, but also to apply it to all those things that are important to us: the universe, the earth, our country, our communities, our schools, our tribal nation, and even our relatives and friends, and also that which is within ourselves. So that's a simple, very easy ceremony in the sense of participation. But there are also very deep ceremonies that are very private. And there's always usually something that we want to create. Usually it's a peace of mind, or if, let's see, for example, let's say there's a bear ceremony. The bear ceremony, we don't do bear ceremonies like other people do, where if you've ever been to a bear ceremony, it's very public. It's very, everybody's invited to come. And that usually when we have a bear ceremony, it's specifically for our tribal people, and usually it has some quality that we're asking to create, and that has to do with the personality or the image of the bear, but also what does a bear mean to us? Well, you can look at a bear. It's strong, it's determined, it's big, it's has an intention. And so let's say we need more determination or strength within our tribal nation. So a bear ceremony is very good to do that ceremony in order to help the people to be stronger, to be determined. Let's say we have a goal that we want to achieve as a nation. So that would be perfect. So there's other ceremonies that we can do. We also have, which is a very wonderful, it's fun ceremony. We haven't done it in a long time, but it's called the moon running ceremony, where we actually have, I think it's because we don't have a location to do it in, because we need an open field where you can see the moon rising. And so the people would gather at the end of the field, and as the moon started to rise, they would run away from the moon in an action, in a way to help the moon rise. You know, they would run and they'd run and they run, and then they would turn around, and then they would see that the moon was up, and it would give them such joy, and they'd celebrate. Oh, the moon has come up, and look, we helped her to come to rise. And I think that is a beautiful ceremony, just in the simplicity of it. And as time has gone on, we've lost the ability to have those beautiful pieces of land where it was just able to run free. And so it's kind of, we haven't done that ceremony a long time, and maybe one day we'll have an area where we can do that, because it's very, I think it's great, especially for the children, to learn, about helping the moon rise, so to speak. Our loved ones who have died. And we always, each of us, if we so choose, we bring a piece of a clothing that they had when they were living. And so there are special songs sung, and there are special singers that sing those songs, and it's usually done in the evening. And it's songs go on and on and on, and there's dancing, there's a back and forth dancing, and there's the singing, and it's just a beautiful, usually it's done in kind of more in the winter, so it's colder. And then each person acknowledges their loved one, and they throw their clothing into the fire, and then the next person does that. So it's acknowledging and letting go of your loved one that you have missed, obviously, or just want to honor and respect and show a love for that. So that's another ceremony that we do.
What I observe from what you just explained about the ceremonies and the overall how people actually got to relate with nature around them, with the land around them, the fundamental thing seems to be related to movement, dynamism. You talked about reciprocity, synchronicity. In a way, you're synchronizing your consciousness with your environment and be able to learn more about the environment. So this is what I kind of try to understand from it. And this basic epistemologies around which the practices, the ceremonies have been designed, and that's the source of reliability, because it's direct synchronicity with the things around you.
Oh, something else I wanted to tell you. Our ancestors of long ago wore no clothing hardly at all. The ancestors really were, they weren't nudists, as you would call it, but they wore very little clothing if they didn't need it for the winter. Like they would have rabbit skin coats in the cold, for example, but they didn't, because they didn't have the European body shame that came as a result of that. But the body became part of the nature around them, so they used their bodies almost like temperature gauges, wind conductors. So if the wind was blowing a certain way, that would tell them something. So if the sun was hitting them a certain way or at a different angle, they would know what time it was. Or so their bodies became these weather gauges, these temperature gauges, and it would give them information. So I think that's so amazing, because we cover our bodies, because that's just what has happened over time, and so we've lost a lot of ability to notice also what's around. So in a way, their bodies were instruments as well. So I think that's fascinating. I think it also gave them insight into living their lives. I wanted to also point out that in ceremonies, probably one of the most interesting plants that were used was stinging nettle. Now today we go, because when you get stinging nettle burns. When you get stuck, it's a very simple plant growing a lot of places right now, and people are afraid to get, there's a stinging nettle, I don't want to go over there. But they actually would get the stinging nettle and hit themselves on their arms and back and everything. It wasn't to torture them. It wasn't to cause harm to them, because they knew, initially that pain would go away. but they did that so they would not be bothered by it after a while. So they actually developed an immunity to the stinging of the nettle. And it strengthened them at first because, it hurts. And then as time went on, it didn't hurt anymore. So it was another way of saying, that we can overcome these things by being in relationship with them. So they were no longer afraid of stinging nettles. So this was like it was used sometimes in coming of age ceremonies as well. But it also was something that they needed to learn as they live their life because, stinging nettle was a very dominant uh, green that was out in the fields and the mountains and everything. So they learned to adjust to it by becoming part of it in a way, by working with it so that it no longer had that power over them. So these are some of the things that they learned with regard to plant life. Very fascinating.
I was going to ask you a follow up to what you just said. So, when you talk about relationship with nature, do you have like offhand some examples where this kind of relationship led to some ecological wisdom that modern technology is now catching up with? Like they are finding out the same thing, but saying that, oh, the Acjachemen people or indigenous tribes already knew about this pattern, and how did they know that? So those kind of questions lead to a merger of sort of ways of knowing. So, are you aware of some sort of these kind of ecological wisdom that modern technology is now catching up with?
Yes, I am aware of some things. And I think when we were talking before we decided to do the podcast, we were talking about how hard it is to see with Western eyes the world around us and change it to back to how our ancestors saw the world. And so, how do we do that? There's the Canadians, the people of Canada there's the Indigenous people. They call it the two-eyed observation. Where they see with the Western eye, and they also see with their native ancestral eyes. And so, what we do now is we do our best to see with our ancestors' eyes, to see what would they have done, how would they have done things, and it really is a clear mindset. And it has to be intentional because of how we have been retrained in many ways to think in different ways and to think more linear rather than in relational. Um, so because of that, a lot of people are reclaiming those old ways by how they work with the animals, how they work with the plants, how they are in relationship with the soil rather than trying to dominate the soil. They're looking at the soil and seeing, well, what is it that we can do to be in good relation with this soil right here? So it's a whole way of thinking and doing and being that we have to literally do it intentionally. It's not that easy. It's going back to observation. It's going back to noticing. It's going back to paying attention. It's going back to even letting some of us who feel confident enough to let our bodies be our gauges. So it's but in doing that, there's a lot of wisdom that comes forth that we can help the world today. I think, but again, it comes noticing the wind patterns, noticing the rain patterns, noticing how the sun is here, and it's different here than it is over there. So noticing what is it like right here, right now. How the moon phases affect us all because the moon affects the waters of the world, the earth, but it also affects the waters of our bodies. So we acknowledge that relationship. We know that it's very important, and so the moon tells us certain things about when to do things and when not to do things. So I think I think there is a body of knowledge being created right now by all kinds of indigenous people who are trying to be helpful with their wisdom. Going back to some of the ways that their ancestors lived. I think one of the ways that I think we've been, and it's very simple and it's not enough at the same time, and that is getting back to using acorns as a staple food and taking advantage of the oak, so to speak, but not in a bad way. It's more of a relational way. Like, how do we honor the oak tree once again? because our ancestors did. They saw, even though most of their, I would say about 75% of their diet was ocean food, they still relied heavily on the acorn as a staple, everyday staple. So there was a whole relationship in how the gathering of the acorns, the storage of the acorns, the preparing of the acorns, and then the ritual. I would say, I'm going to say ritual. It's just more ceremonial in creating the actual food that the ancestors used that was tasty for their palate. So even though we have now we like things sweet, most of us, so I think that's okay. Some people say, oh, we shouldn't put anything else in it, but I think, if you're going to enjoy something, you want to make it tasty, right? So I think it's okay to add other fruits and things like that. I'm sure our ancestors got very creative, and they may not have but they, but also, they knew how to prepare it in such a way at different stages of its cooking. For example, when they took the milk from the bowl, they, so to speak, to drink it for the elders, it was a very nutritional drink. So those are all part of that learning and processing and going back to how the ancestors did things. And I think it's very vital. I think it's healthy. And we could, people would say, yes, that's getting back to the old way, which is also very healthy. It was a healthy way of living. And I think our ancestors didn't have a very long lifespan, and it had to do with weather and all kinds of other things. But I think as far as their diet went, I think they ate very well. I think they ate very healthy.
The inertia to go back to the old ways, unfortunately, comes from the Western eye. And whatever efforts have been done in that direction also are entrenched with it. So I remember coming across a text in some form of decolonial literature, which seeks to distance itself from this Western eye, but it's so entrenched in the way we are even talking, in the way we are pursuing the knowledge with a logical structure, with the hope that some template of knowing will be fulfilled, and that is basically through education we have learned those templates of knowing. So I remember reading this text which said that indigenous people treated all other life forms with equal rights as humans. So I was like, okay, that's maybe an extrapolation, but I'm not sure whether the indigenous in the first place thought in terms of rights. It was a different way of feeling your environment altogether, as far as I have understood so far. So when you might have come across these kind of decolonial literature texts, or people otherwise who are advocating for trying to lean in, definitely it's very nice of those authors, those people, but do you feel that they miss a certain essence of indigeneity by trying to side with something that they have not yet understood themselves, whose experience is not with them? And what do you think that decolonial literature actually gets wrong? And how does it miss the indigenous essence if it does so? That's something that I want to really have your thoughts on.
First of all, I want to say that Western thinking is not bad, because it isn't either indigenous thinking or Western thinking, or either or. It's not bad. It's the Western culture and the way it, has gotten us pretty far scientifically in all of the knowledge that linear development has been worthy. And what I think we're trying to talk about here and create here is that there can be both existing at the same time. I think in some ways, because I feel like now what the only problem is with Western thinking is they take these things and they try to make it. I've got some notes here that I wrote because I wanted to bring that up. What we want to do is to have people be more in relationship with nature. But that doesn't necessarily mean that they have to go. They have to have everything the way it was, because we are too much in the Western thinking. So how do we bring those two together and make it work? And I think people are doing it. I think farming cultures, especially cultures that are organic and also and regenerative. Now, to me, that is getting back. It's like bringing the two together, indigenous thinking, because You have to have some relationship with the land. You have to pay attention to how the land is. You have to look at and then we have to look at the chemistry of the earth as well. So we have all that knowledge in Western culture now that we can do those kinds of things. But we also have a way of being in relationship with that earth we are testing. There has to be some kind of, it's again dancing with things, dancing with it, creating its own music. So there are contemporary ways that we can do those similar things, but in a very good way, which is healthy, which is productive, and at the same time it's teaching the young ones how to be with the earth and with the plants and things like that. I think it's important to see that trees are alive, living beings. I think I shared with you before about this little boy that raised his hand. Well, because I was talking about the homes that my ancestors lived in. They lived in what is called a quicha, which is a tule and willow structure that was perfect for them to sleep in, to store things in, and it didn't kill the plants. It only took from the plants what they needed, but they didn't kill the plant. They didn't kill the willow tree. They didn't kill the tule. They just helped by cleaning out too much tule along the edges of the creeks. And so therefore that was a really necessary thing, that they helped the tule to prosper on its own. So by doing this, everybody won. The tule won, the willow won, and the people won, because they had beautiful homes in which to live in. So I was talking to these kids about this, and this one little boy raises his hand and he goes, well, why didn't they just cut trees down and build houses like we do today? And so I think I shared with you, well, after having some thought, I began to see, oh, well, we have to see, our ancestors saw the trees as living beings, and that they also had homes for a lot of the birds and other animals, the squirrels and things that lived in that tree. They didn't see it as something that they should kill. And so it was very important to have that one acknowledging that the tree had something of tremendous value, not just to the people, but also to the other creatures and beings that were there. They also saw the necessity for the shade of the tree. They also saw the necessity, if it was let's say it was an oak tree and it gave the acorn, that acorn was life-giving, and they needed to make sure that those trees were very vital and alive and taken care of. So it was a very different way of thinking. Now we cut trees down to build homes, but we don't see those trees as living, as important. We see them as what we need to do right now is build houses for people. And so it's a whole another way of looking at things. Should we say that's wrong way thinking? I cannot say that's wrong way thinking, because that's putting a judgment on that. But what I see is that if we had noticed that some trees we need to let be, because one, their canopy keeps the ground safe. It does, it's part of the culture of the land there, with all the creatures that live there. So is there a place we can do this without causing that kind of harm? So it wasn't look so much as that. It was just take whatever you need, forget about anything around the edges and the people and all of that. So it was so we have to just kind of look from both angles to see, well, what can we do better? So let's see, are we talking about decolonization now?
Yeah, let's talk about that.
I thought a lot about this. Decolonization is the claiming of who gets to tell the story and how it is told. So I think there's an internal decolonization is deeply personal, and it's indeed spiritual. But it's an unlearning of beliefs that were imposed or taught as the only way. So when we say something needs to be decolonized, what are we saying? I would like to look at it from a way that it has to do more, and we continue to keep that relational conversation by reclaiming identity, story, and ancestral wisdom, by reconnecting to the earth and to the spirit of the life around us and to our communities. So we learn to notice through our own cultural lenses and not someone else's. So I think that's really important. It's I think the political decolonization conversation can be rather harsh. And the reason why I say that is because I've heard people speak and talk. It's almost, there's so much anger, there's so much bitterness, and it concerned me only because I was wondering, um, will this work to be so bitter and to be so angry? And I think each of us needs to handle that for ourselves. Those of us who are Indigenous peoples or tribal members, we need to see what happened in history of our own tribal histories, and we need to come to terms with it. We need to see, how does that affect me today? How am I living today? How did that affect my whole family? How did it affect my grandma and my grandpa? How did it affect, and what can I do as a human being today to to get back to those ways of being that worked for our ancestors for thousands of years? So it's a reclaiming of identity rather than pushing away the identity that was put upon our ancestors. So it's not like ripping that away so fast. It's part of who we are now. So we have to be very careful. But I think it's possible to heal by bringing back those internal ways of relation and community and reconnection. But it's also, to heal from what has happened in the past. That interrupted. I think it was a huge interruption to people. That sudden change. It was rather sudden, actually. I think it was pretty sudden. It was not a gradual. It was a pretty abrupt, especially when the Spanish padres came into Southern California, what we know today as Southern California, and everywhere, all around where they were. Literally, it was a big challenge to the people, because it was like it was so fast, so sudden, that it was a huge upheaval. And so, how do we heal from that? It's taken a long time for me to heal from it, and some of us, we could say, haven't healed at all. It's like, but each of us, I consider each of us responsible for our own healing. I think that's why I do the work I do in the tribe spiritually, is because I know that I can help people to heal from those things. And what occurred to me, and I'm just saying this now, is that what I discovered is that every single human being on this planet has some historical trauma, either as victims or as perpetrators. And so, therefore, I think all of us need to work on this together. We need to feel that we're not alone, because a lot of times what happens is we feel like we're very much alone. And so, out of that comes hostility and vengeance. My concern is that we will begin to treat people or act as though we are the perpetrators rather than the victims. And so we need to be very cautious. We need to be very cautious.
So, in your own healing from this historical trauma, during this process, what drew you personally towards Catholicism, given how Christianity has this legacy of hostility
Yes.
against the indigenous?
I think it's a fascinating story. When I look at it from very far away and look at myself and how I evolved as a human being, it's fascinating to me. But once again, I've always honored my grandmothers. And so my grandmother was a very devout Catholic. And then they were raised Catholic from the generation before them and the generation before them. So there was a few generations that passed from the mission time period. But what I saw was that their faith was beautiful. And I just observed. I was a little girl. I just observed. I wasn't much of a talker. I didn't say much. I just watched. I learned a lot from my grandmother. I saw her faith in action by the way that she did things. She was a beautiful woman with a beautiful way of being. And so I was fortunate to be able to spend time with her when I was younger. And so her faith, I saw her faith and how she did things. And then I also saw that my mother was her daughter, and she also was given that same beautiful way of being, prayer life and kindness. My mother was a very kind woman, and people came to her all the time for wisdom, because for some reason she had this innate ability to share wisdom with her own siblings, but also with friends and other people. And I watched her and I observed her, and her faith saved my life. And so it wasn't hard for me to embrace that faith, because it helped me when I was a little girl. And so because of that, I felt, I felt safe at that time when I was younger to have that kind of a faith. I wasn't aware of dogma. I wasn't aware of, hierarchical teachings. I wasn't aware of all of that until I got much older. And then I began to study it. And that's when I began to see, oh, I see what's going on here. There were distinctions. And I wanted to live my life in a good way, and I felt sometimes that the teachings of the church were not teaching compassion, but were teaching regimentation and control and things like that. And that some people got left out and other people didn't. So then that became a concern for me. Why are these people not accepted here? They should, this is a church. This is where Jesus was. This is where Jesus loved everybody. So why, so I began to see that rules and regulations and things like that were not helping matters in the world. And so that's when I decided that I was going to, I left the Roman Catholic Church, and I began to find other ways of practicing a faith. But I've always had a faith, whether in a church or not in a church. But then I came across the Ecumenical Catholic Church, which I think we've talked a lot about. And so one of the questions you had was, what's the difference between Roman Catholicism and Ecumenical Catholicism? Well, there's probably a lot of very differences, but I think probably the Roman Catholic Church, it has to do with its structure, its authority, and its hierarchy under the Pope. It holds the continuity of the story, its lineage, its authority, and its sacramental life. So, it's a beautiful structure that you can study anywhere. You can get books on it. Tons of things have been written about that structure. But what I felt was happening was there were too many rules and regulations. There were too many. It was like they had these beautiful things called sacraments, but they controlled who could have them and who could not. And that's where I really had trouble. And once again, I was, I've always been a little bit of a renegade, a little bit of a, wait a minute, la la la, So I had to really let that go. I had to let that structure go because I didn't feel good in it. And so but I still love the sacraments. I still love the Mass. I still love the songs. I still loved all of that, where I got the peace, where I felt safe. And so how do I do this? And so that's when I came across the Ecumenical Catholic Church. And so what I saw, that it was open. The church was very open to dialogue and unity with others, so that more of an approach of spirit and unity of spirit, and the ecumenical recognizes the threads of that story in others and walks together where they can. So it was almost like, I don't know if you're familiar with the Second Vatican Council, but that was the opening of the door when they revamped the whole Roman Catholic Church. And it was a beautiful beginning, but then everything went back to the structure and the control and the domination, and didn't let this beautiful thing unfold. I call it the breath of the Holy Spirit came into the Roman Catholic Church, and then everything just went, as time went on, it just again became what it used to be. And so the Ecumenical Catholic Church, I feel like they said, okay, we now have this new opportunity. Let's start creating relationships with other Christians and other people, and provide a sacramental life for them as well. So that's how I found myself in that particular situation. And in doing that, I began to heal also from that trauma of, that historical trauma that was put upon our ancestors. I felt this was a way that I personally could deal with it, by going to a place that didn't have that kind of structure, and that it was more open and more loving. And believe you me, the Ecumenical Catholic Church has its problems. Every church does, as far as I can observe. Whenever you put people in together and you put a structure around them and you decide there's a certain way of things, there are problems, because we're human beings. But I find that it's way more loving, way more accepting, and it has to do with relation rather than control. So that really works for me. And I think that it's it's a good fit for a lot of, especially Indigenous people who threw away the church. One, because of the history, which I think was a very normal reaction for the thinker, for the person who paid attention to history, who noticed things. I think it was a very normal reaction to pull away from the Roman Catholic Church because of what happened. And I think whether they come back or go back to the church structure, it's really a very deeply personal decision that needs to be made. I really don't. I'm what I say is I'm here for you, and whatever you need. I don't try to convert people. I don't try to convince them. I'm just here. I'm here to give them blessings, to listen, to share my words of wisdom if they come forth. But I usually draw from my ancestral wisdom rather than my Catholic wisdom. I think the Catholic wisdom would be just having compassion and love for people. I find that Jesus, who walked this land for many centuries ago, or 2000, well, more than that now, that his wisdom has something to offer to each human being, whether they consider themselves a Christian or not. He had some beautiful teachings, and I've studied many teachers, but I do believe that Jesus is definitely the one who came to save us from our own selves, so to speak. But I have that faith, but it's a deeply personal one. It's very deep, very deeply personal.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Mother Adelia. This was a once lifetime opportunity for me. While I edit this, also I'm gonna focus on each and everything that you said, and I'm going to imbibe that in my life. And I hope people also are able to do that. And thank you so much for being the medium of age-old wisdom that your tribe and people who have stayed indigenous have collected over thousands of years, and to be able to distill that with the grace that you have allowed. I'm really, really grateful. Thank you so much, Mother.